Cliffe and Stuart are a father-son apologetics duo that have risen to popularity over the last few years due to their viral clips on college campuses responding to intense attacks on the Christian faith. In a recent podcast interview, they went deep on the justice of hell, money and ministry, and much more. After watching this video, if you're a Christian, you're going to be better prepared to give an answer for the hope that lies within you. And if you're a non-Christian watching this video, I believe you're going to be more and more convinced that Christianity is the truth, and break down some of those misconceptions that you might have had about Christianity. Cliffe and Stuart truly have a gift in verbalizing sensitive theological topics in understandable ways, and I think that's well on display in this video. I'm going to give some further commentary and share some of my thoughts as well. I'm excited, so let's dive in.
And then what about hell? Like how is hell depicted? Because that for me is a very interesting one. It sounds illogical, or at least not intuitive, that someone can exist not well for a life that's maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years long, and sin and not ask for forgiveness, and then for eternity be banished to hell.
This is a question I've heard many, many times, and I'm sure Cliffe and Stuart have heard it as well. Why is there hell? Hell doesn't feel just. It doesn't feel like a just proportion if I say one lie and then I'm sent to hell for all of eternity. That seems unjust.
Well, sin doesn't send you to hell. It's what you do with Jesus Christ. What do you do with God? Are you going to live for yourself? So David Foster Wallace, you guys probably know him. He wrote Infinite Jest, was probably going to be the greatest writer of our era. Atheist, he said, everybody worships something. If it's something that is ultimately infinite, it can buoy you in a way where you can make it through suffering. But if it's something that is like looks, talent, money, that's all going to fade away. And eventually it'll eat you alive. He pointed to a type of heaven and hell he ultimately didn't believe, but he said it makes a lot of sense.
That makes sense from a philosophical standpoint. Another way of looking at it is just this illustration that I heard from an evangelist, and it goes like this. If I were to lie to my brother, nothing would really happen. If I was a little kid, he might try to tell on me, hey mom, he lied, my brother lied to me, Isaac lied to me, but nothing would really happen. If I lied to my parent, all of a sudden there are further consequences. I might get my, iPod privileges taken away, or no TV time or whatever, or put on timeout if I'm a little kid. But what if I now lie to a police officer? Well, those consequences are going to be more severe. And then imagine I'm testifying before a judge, before a jury, and I'm asked, are you going to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth? And I say yes. But then I lie. It turns into a serious offense against the judge. Now, what about God? To Stuart's point, God is infinite, right? God is infinite. So then when we commit an offense against God, that is an infinite offense against God. So the justification is always, well, you're saying if I just commit one lie, then I am, I'm going to go to hell for all of eternity. How could a good God do this? Well, what it says in James is you can keep the law, the entire law, and yet stumble at one point and you're guilty of all of it. And how can that be? Well, because the law is all tied together. It's not just I'm committing one lie here or I'm committing one sin here. It's, am I rebelling against God, or am I worshiping and honoring him as he deserves? And the truth is, we've all fallen short of the glory of God. Hey, quick thing before we get back into the video. If you want to get off YouTube and you want to just listen to this episode, head over to Spotify or Apple Music, link in description, and you can listen to all the episodes on there. Also, if you're encouraged by what I'm doing here, this is what I would ask you, is that this ministry is supported by you guys on Patreon. That's the primary way that people can support what I'm doing. My goal is to help equip you to follow Jesus daily. And if you're blessed by this ministry, man, it would be such a blessing to me if you supported on there. This is how I support my family as well. And so thank you so much to all of you who are on there. Now, back to the video.
These kids on college campuses believe in a heaven and hell typically, and there's a growing belief in hell specifically because they want justice. If you don't have hell, there's no judgment day, and ultimately endless amounts of people are going to be ripped off. And there's no justice from a moral, objective perspective either, if there is no God.
This is a really good point, and I think this plays into people's question, like, why doesn't God just eliminate all the evil in the world? Why doesn't he just wipe it out? And the truth of that is that we would be part of that wiping out. God would have to wipe us out because we are perpetrators of evil. But the good news of God is that he is patient and long-suffering and withholds that wrath that we are due because he wants all of us to come to a saving knowledge of his son.
Are there certain people, though, that are born evil per se?
So we were talking about New York City. Do you know how many people just stood by in the subway when that woman was burnt to death by that illegal immigrant? 6. They were just watching right there. I mean, within 10 yards, doing nothing. Or, for example, 1964, Genevieve, the young woman who was all 38 witnesses in those buildings did not a thing. They didn't come down. They didn't make any calls. And what happened? That man comes back 10 minutes later and just finishes her off. So if you don't think that we have evil in our hearts, that we're not dirty, rotten sinners, I don't know what that is.
I think some of us have experienced something similar, at least, like seeing something wrong, unjust happen and doing nothing because it inconveniences us. You see like a car accident happen and you don't want to stop. You don't want to see, it's going to inconvenience you. And that's just one aspect of our sinful nature. Some people just believe that we are pretty good people generally, we're good people. And yet we've made some mistakes. Sure. Yeah. Made some mistakes. And that's why Jesus came to forgive us those few mistakes. But then there's also this other idea, which I think is a more biblical idea, that we are dead in our trespasses and sins, incapable of doing good. That's what it says in Romans. But Jesus came to resuscitate us, to bring us back from spiritual death into spiritual life. If you go with the first idea, it's like Jesus is a napkin that you put on a spill on the tablecloth. I'm just going to put this napkin over it, cover it up so nobody can see it. But I believe the Bible speaks to Jesus being more than just a band-aid on our sin, but rather he wants to wash us, to heal us, to make us new. He wants to take that dirty tablecloth and wash it, make it white as snow. But we need to admit the truth and not make excuses. It's so easy to say, oh yeah, I'm a good person. I remember being like 11 years old and my older brother asked me, Isaac, are you a good person? And I found my whole identity in being a good person and doing my schoolwork and doing the chores and being the best kid to get my parents' attention. I was full of myself and I didn't actually encounter Jesus till he humbled me. He showed me my sin, that I broke his law, and yet he gave himself for me to pay the punishment for my sins. Man, that was life-changing, but I never really understood how amazing Jesus was until I let go and was convicted for my sin and stopped clinging onto my good works that I did to try to earn his love or earn my parents' love.
Now, what I'm curious about is how Christians discern against someone who is very sincere in what they want to get across and someone who's just seeking personal gain. Like, I think a lot of criticism has been directed towards like televangelists or people who have used donations to fund luxury lifestyles and private jets and mansions.
But when Jesus says in Matthew 7:1, judge not lest you be judged, he's not saying suspend your critical thinking and stop making analysis. No. If that televangelist is saying, I believe in Jesus, and then they go out and sleep around, I believe in Jesus, and then they go out and live an opulent lifestyle and could give a rip about the poor, you are one stinking hypocrite.
To Cliffe's point, in Matthew 7:15, it says, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. Or 2 Timothy 4 verse 3, for a time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but having itching ears, they will acclimate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions. We all see the old guard of televangelists, megachurch preachers, Joel Osteen, Kenneth Copeland, Creflo Dollar, the list goes on. And I think there's plenty of coverage of why these guys are a problem, why they distort the gospel, why they are wolves in sheep's clothing, seeking money and power and fame and all those kinds of things. And obviously they found a niche where they are scratching people's ears, right? What that means is they're telling people what they want to hear. And what that sounds like from Joel Osteen is your best life now. You can get exactly what you want. You can have this wonderful life. Jesus will make you be prosperous. But it's a lie. It's a falsehood. It's a distortion of the gospel. And I think we're pretty on that for the most part. The thing is there's a next generation of these kind of televangelists, but instead of coming to you on TBN, on the TV or wherever else in a suit, they're coming to you on social media, on TikTok, on Reels, Instagram, on YouTube, and they're preaching it a little bit differently. They're being more sly with it. Maybe it's not the out and open health, wealth, prosperity gospel, but I think a lot of you that are watching are discerning enough to begin to see the cracks in some of their message that, wait a minute, there's some word of faith here that they're saying you proclaim it and you claim it and you manifest it, or this is the same thing as Joel Osteen, just in a different package. The thing is, anytime somebody critiques someone, one of these next generation prosperity preachers, preachers, false teachers, there'll be immediate calls, especially on social media, that you should not judge. And we should listen to Cliffe when he talks about what this actually means, because it doesn't mean don't judge people, right? Like he said, it doesn't mean withhold your righteous judgment. No, Jesus is saying that, with the same judgment that you use against other people, God will use to you. Okay, so that is a warning that if you're putting this judgment on these teachers and yet you're not holding yourself to that, that's a problem. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't judge, especially when preachers are leading people astray. It's a distortion of the gospel, and it won't save anybody.
At what point is amassing a certain amount of wealth like sinning?
That's a very sensitive question, Jack.
Yeah.
And the reason it's such a good question is because the sin that Jesus attacks most consistently in the New Testament is greed. The Bible consistently says not that money is evil, but that the love of money is evil. And yet it's amazingly easy in our culture to justify not being more generous and giving more away, keeping more for myself. And to be honest with you, Jack, you've just put your finger on the biggest ethical struggle I have. I'm a pastor. I speak to university students about faith in Christ. Why do I have as much as I do?
In the early Christian church, there was this husband and wife, and they had sold a piece of property. Well, in those days, it was just common that everything that you sell, you're going to give to the church, right? Because everything was everyone's. It was this communal society where, you gave your clothes to somebody else and you shared your food with them. It was a beautiful thing. In fact, other cultures at the time would look inside and be like, wow, this is crazy. How can people live like this? Now, the problem was that this couple, after they sold this piece of property, said, hey, yeah, we gave everything to the church. Yeah, because we love God, in order to gain, approval from everyone, respect, to put on the appearance of piety and generosity. The issue is that they withheld some portion of the payment. The Apostle Peter confronted the husband and he fell dead on the spot. And then later he confronted the wife, and the wife was still trying to cover up the story, and she fell dead on the spot. The couple's name was Ananias and Sapphira, and their story is a testimony to the fact that you can't lie to God. He knows what's in your heart, and he knows the truth. Cliffe's tension here that he speaks of is a good one. I think that all of us Christians should have. It's, are only the truly realized Christians the ones that give away everything? Like, that's a question that we need to ask. But then we go into the other parts of the scripture where it talks about a man that does not provide for his relatives is worse than an unbeliever. So there's this tension here between generosity and responsibility for your family that I think all of us need to wrestle with. Like the story of Ananias and Sapphira illustrates, you can't lie to God. You can't pretend you're so generous and giving, and yet in your heart you have this greed. You're withholding from him.
What has been the most difficult belief or concept that you wrestle with?
The problem of suffering. John and I have a younger brother who lost a 7-year-old daughter in a horrible car accident. So I flew out there and walked with him around the field behind his house, and to listen to the pain over losing his little daughter was incredible. So the question obviously then becomes, okay, the babysitter didn't see the stop sign, drove right through the stop sign, and a pickup truck at 55 miles an hour came careening down the road, smacked into the side of that car, sending our little niece, his daughter, into an early grave. Okay, God, why didn't the babysitter see the stop sign? Why was the pickup truck coming exactly 55 miles an hour? See, there's a bunch of I do not know. But my faith in God, my faith in Christ is not based on the circumstances of life. It's based on the character of God.
But one of the most important things that we need to know about suffering is that Jesus can sympathize and has experienced this suffering too. We're not alone in it. This is what Hebrews 4 says. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who is in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Or Isaiah 53, where it speaks of how he was treated. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and as one from whom men hide their faces. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. You can see the pain and the agony and the suffering that he went through. And so when you feel like, man, what's going on? Like, this sucks. This is awful. This hurts. Jesus knows that feeling. I think of Job, who lost everything and wanted to curse his life and die. And yet again, I think about the potter and the clay, how we are the clay and God is doing this molding. And yet through that molding process, things are it's going to hurt. This reshaping, it's going to hurt. I think of the verse in Romans 8:28 where it says, "And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purposes." I think the biggest thing that I have been reminded of, and it was in a sermon last week where a similar kind of story, a grandfather, his granddaughter was struggling with cancer, and he was praying, "God, like, heal her, please fix this," right? But his daughter, the mother of the young girl, was praying, "God, let your purposes go forward. I pray that your purposes are fulfilled through this suffering." And that is a powerful prayer. It's the understanding that the good that God is bringing about isn't necessarily that everything works out the way that we want it to, but that his purposes are going to be fulfilled. And ultimately, that is what's best for us. That's often not an easy thing to come to terms with when you're in the thick of suffering. But on the other side, you can begin to see more clearly how God is working.
That's why C.S. Lewis, the most reluctant convert, the greatest mind over at Oxford and Cambridge, said, originally, I wasn't a Christian because I didn't think there was enough evidence. But then all of a sudden, I was really encountered with a lot of suffering. And then I really thought, if there's a God, he's definitely not a good God to allow suffering. Oh, wait, if I believe that this is really wrong, this suffering, well, then I'm ushering in a type of moral obligation. This is morally wrong. It's intangible. So there must be some type of spiritual, ethereal existence that actually says this is really wrong.
I mean, that's a powerful apologetic point. When somebody is claiming, man, how could there be a God because there's so much suffering and evil in the world? And you need to ask them, okay, but by what standard are you calling those things wrong? Evil. Like, this is a moral term, like Stuart is saying. But even atheists know, no, something is up here because they're appealing to their conscience. The thing that God has given them that says, something's not right here. This is wrong. This is evil. This is not the way it should be. And that's true. Because of the fall, evil and suffering has entered the world. And this is where we call people to say, hey, yes, you're right. This is wrong. This is not right. But God came in the flesh to make things right, to restore creation to himself.
And what are some of the barriers that you found that you have to overcome?
Sex. I was talking to a guy at Yale, and he just kept jumping all over the place. Oh, there's inconsistency in the text here. Oh, over here, Stuart, you don't live a consistent lifestyle anyway, so probably I shouldn't believe in Christ. Oh, here, he was just doing the machine gun style. And then I said, I think there's something underneath this. I think it's more of an emotional issue. If Christianity were true, would you believe in it? If they say yes, then it was an evidentiary issue that they believe it actually is true, so I better hold on to it. It's truth. If they say no, it's clearly an emotional bias. I said, okay, so you don't like the ethics. Which ethic do you not like? And he said, sex. I want to sleep around as much as possible. I said, well, that's why, exactly. It's an emotional issue for you. That's why you don't believe.
This is why we need to understand the limit of apologetics, what apologetics are used for. Apologetics, yeah, they can answer questions. Yes, it's important to have an answer to why you believe what you believe. Absolutely. Apologetics primarily, I believe, are an encouragement for the believer because at the end of the day, the unbeliever, it isn't so much. Now, maybe for very particular people, there's an issue that they need an answer to. But for a lot of people, it's, well, if this is true, I have to give up my life, my lifestyle. I have to surrender this to God. I have to pick up my cross and follow him. And that is hard. That sucks. That feels like a loss. And I mean, even when you look at people that have deconstructed their faith, the gloss they'll put on it is, well, I have all these questions that have gone unanswered. But you dig a little bit deeper and it turns out, man, it was a sin issue. They wanted to partake in a particular sin that God did not give them license to. Now, as much as we could judge people for feeling this way, for believing this, look, we were in the same spot until God convicted our heart and gave us faith, brought us to himself. And so that's what we should be praying for all those folks that, feel like they still can't give up the sin, that God would convict them, that he would bring them to spiritual life, that they would put to death those sins through his power. The Bible makes this decision very, very clear. What would it profit a man if he gains the whole world and yet lose his soul? What would it profit a man to partake in as many sexual encounters and experiences to his heart's delight and yet lose his soul? Is it really worth it? Shout out to Cliffe and Stuart for your guys' ministry. May God continue to bless you guys in what you're doing. Until next time, God bless.